Prapathakas 5 of the Chandogya Upanishad, translated by Max Müller, recording by Jyoti Taravanat. Fifth Prapataka, First Kanda. He who knows the oldest and the best becomes himself the oldest and the best. Breath indeed is the oldest and the best. He who knows the richest becomes himself the richest. Speech indeed is the richest. He who knows the firm rest becomes himself firm in this world and in the next. The eye indeed is the firm rest. He who knows success, his wishes succeed, both his divine and human wishes. The ear indeed is success. He who knows the home becomes the home of his people. The mind indeed is the home. The five senses quarrel together. Who was the best, saying, I am better, I am better. They went to the father Prajapati and said, Sir, who is the best of us? He replied, He by whose departure the body seems worse than worst. He is the best of you. The tongue, speech, departed. And having been absent for a year, it came round and said, How have you been able to live without me? They replied, Like mute people, not speaking, but breathing with the breath, seeing with the eye, hearing with the ear, thinking with the mind. Thus we lived. Then speech went back. The eye sight departed. And having been absent for a year, it came round and said, How have you been able to live without me? They replied, Like blind people, not seeing, but breathing with the breath, speaking with the tongue, hearing with the ear, thinking with the mind. Thus we lived. Then the eye went back. The ear, hearing, departed. And having been absent for a year, it came round and said, How have you been able to live without me? They replied, Like deaf people, not hearing, but breathing with the breath, speaking with the tongue, thinking with the mind. Thus we lived. Then the ear went back. The mind departed. And having been absent for a year, it came round and said, How have you been able to live without me? They replied, Like children, whose mind is not yet formed, but breathing with the breath, speaking with the tongue, seeing with the eye, hearing with the ear. Thus we lived. Then the mind went back. The breath, when on the point of departing, tore up the other senses, as a horse going to start. I might tear up the pegs to which he is tethered. They came to him and said, Sir, be thou our Lord, thou art the best among us. Do not depart from us. Then the tongue said to him, If I am the richest, thou art the richest. The eye said to him, If I am the firm rest, thou art the firm rest. The ear said to him, If I am success, thou art success. The mind said to him, If I am the home, thou art the home. And people do not call them the tongues, the eyes, the ears, the minds, but the breaths, prana, the senses. For breath are all these. Second Kanda. Breath said, What shall be my food? They answered, Whatever there is, even unto dogs and birds. Therefore this is food for Ana, the breather. His name is clearly Ana. To him who knows this, there is nothing that is not proper food. He said, What shall be my dress? They answered, Water. Therefore wise people, when they are going to eat food, surround their food before and after with water. He, Prana, thus gains a dress and is no longer naked. Satyakama Gabala, after he had communicated this to Gosruti Vyagrapadya, said to him, "If you were to tell this to a dry stick, branches would grow and leaves spring from it. If a man wishes to reach greatness, let him perform the Diksha preparatory rites on the day of the new moon, and then on the night of the full moon let him stir a mash of all kinds of herbs with curds and honey, and let him pour ghee on the fire, Avasthya Laukika, saying Swaha to the oldest and the best. After that, let him throw all that remains of the ghee into the mash. In the same manner, let him pour ghee on the fire, saying Swaha to the richest. After that, let him throw all that remains together into the mash. In the same manner, let him pour ghee on the fire, saying Swaha to the firm rest. After that, let him throw all that remains together into the mash. In the same manner, let him pour ghee on the fire, saying Swaha to success. After that, let him throw all that remains together into the mash. Then going forward and placing the mash in his hands, he recites, Thou Prana art Ama by name, for all this together exists in thee. He is the oldest and best, the king, the sovereign. May he make me the oldest, the best, the king, the sovereign. May I be all this. Then he eats with the following Rig verse at every foot. We choose that food. Here he swallows. Of the divine Savitri, Prana, here he swallows. The best and all supporting food, here he swallows. We meditate on the speed of Bhaga, Savitri, Prana, here he drinks all. Having cleansed the vessel, whether it be a Kamsa or a Jamsa, he sits down behind the fire on a skin or on the bare ground, without speaking or making any other effort. If in his dream he sees a woman, let him know this is to be a sign that his sacrifice has succeeded. On this there is a sloka. If during sacrifices, which are to fulfill certain wishes, he sees in his dreams a woman, let him know success from this vision in a dream. From this vision in a dream. Swetaketu Varuneya went to an assembly of the Panchalas. Pravahana Gaivali said to him, Boy, has your father instructed you? Yes, sir, he replied. Do you know to what place men go from here? No, sir, he replied. Do you know how they return again? No, sir, he replied. Do you know where the path of Devas and the path of the fathers diverge? No, sir, he replied. Do you know why that world never becomes full? No, sir, he replied. Do you know why in the fifth libation water is called man? No, sir, he replied. Then why did you say you had been instructed? How could anybody who did not know these things say that he had been instructed? Then the boy went back sorrowful to the place of his father and said, Though you had not instructed me, sir, you said you had instructed me. That fellow of the Rajanya asked me 5 questions, and I could not answer one of them. The father said, As you have told me these questions of his, I do not know any of them. If I knew these questions, how should I not have told you? Then Gautama went to the king's place, and when he had come to him, the king offered him proper respect. In the morning, the king went out on his way to the assembly. The king said to him, Sir Gautama, ask a boon of such things as men possesses. He replied, Such things as men possesses may remain with you. Tell me the speech which you addressed to the boy." The king was perplexed, and commanded him, saying, "Stay with me some time." Then he said, "As to what you have said to me, Gautama, this knowledge did not go to any Brahmana before you, and therefore this teaching belonged in all the worlds to the Kshatriya class alone." Then he began. Fourth Kanda. The altar on which the sacrifice is supposed to be offered is that world, heaven, O Gautama. Its fuel is the sun itself, the smoke his rays, the light the day, the coals the moon, the sparks the stars. On that altar the Devas, or Pranas represented by Agni, etc., offer the Shraddha libation consisting of water. From that oblation rises Soma, the king, the moon. Fifth Kanda. The altar is Parjanya, the god of rain. O Gautama, its fuel is the air itself, the smoke the cloud, the light the lightning, the coals the thunderbolt, the sparks the thunderings. On that altar the Devas offer Soma, the king, the moon. From that oblation rises rain. Sixth Kanda. The altar is the earth, O Gautama. Its fuel is the ear itself, the smoke the ether, the light the night, the coals the quarters, the sparks the intermediate quarters. On that altar the Devas, Pranas offer rain. From that oblation rises food, corn, etc. Seventh Kanda. The altar is man, O Gautama. Its fuel speech itself, the smoke the breath, the light the tongue, the coals the eye, the sparks the ear. On that altar the Devas, Pranas offer food. From that oblation rises seed. Eighth Kanda. The altar is woman, O Gautama. On that altar the Devas, Pranas offer seed. From that oblation rises the germ. Ninth Kanda. For this reason is water in the fifth oblation called man. This germ, covered in the womb, having dwelt there 10 months or more or less, is born. When born, he lives whatever the length of his life may be. When he has departed, his friends carry him, as appointed, to the fire of the funeral pile, from whence he came, from whence he sprang. 10th Kanda. Those who know this, even though they still be Grihasthas, householders, and those who in the forest follow faith and austerities, the Vanaprasthas, and of the Parivragas, those who do not yet know the highest Brahman, go to light Archis. From light to day, from day to the light half of the moon, from the light half of the moon to the 6 months when the sun goes to the north, from the 6 months when the sun goes to the north to the year, from the year to the sun, from the sun to the moon, from the moon to the lightning, there is a person not human. He leads them to Brahman, the conditioned Brahman. This is the path of the Devas. But they who living in a village practice a life of sacrifices, works of public utility, and alms, they go to the smoke, from smoke to night, from night to the dark half of the moon, from the dark half of the moon to the 6 months when the sun goes to the south, but they do not reach the year. From the months they go to the world of the fathers, from the world of the fathers to the ether, from the ether to the moon. That is Soma, the king. Here they are loved, eaten by the Devas. Yes, the Devas love, eat them. Having dwelt there till their good works are consumed, they return again that way as they came to the ether, from the ether to the air. Then the sacrificer, having become air, becomes smoke. Having become smoke, he becomes mist. Having become mist, he becomes a cloud. Having become a cloud, he rains down. Then he is born as rice and corn, herbs and trees, sesame and beans. From thence the escape is the behest with most difficulties. For whoever the person may be, they eat the food, and beget offspring. He henceforth becomes like unto them. Those whose conduct has been good will quickly attain some good birth, the birth of a Brahmana, or a Kshatriya, or a Vaisya. But those whose conduct has been evil will quickly attain an evil birth, the birth of a dog, or a hog, or a Chandala. On neither of these two ways those small creatures, flies, worms, etc., or continually returning, of whom it may be said, live and die, theirs is a third place. Therefore that world never becomes full. Hence let a man take care of himself. And thus it is said in the following sloka: A man who steals gold, who drinks spirits, who dishonors his Guru's bed, who kills a Brahman, these four fall, and as a fifth he who associates with them. But he who thus knows the five fires is not defiled by sin, even though he associates with them. He who knows this is pure, clean, and obtains the world of the blessed. He obtains the world of the blessed. 11th Kanda. Prachina Sala Anupamanyava Satyayajna Pavloshi Indrayumna Bhailavya Jana Sarkarakshya and Budila Asvantrasavi. These great five householders and great theologians came once together and held a discussion as to what is our self and what is Brahman. They reflected and said, Sirs, there is that Uddalaka Aruni who knows at present that self called Vaisavanara. Well, let's go to him. They went to him. But he reflected, Those great householders and great theologians will examine me, and I shall not be able to tell them all. Therefore, I shall recommend another teacher to them. He said to them, Sirs, Asvapati Kaikeya knows at present that self called Vaisvanara. Well, let us go to him. They went to him. When they arrived, the king ordered proper presents to be made separately to each of them. And rising the next morning, he said, In my kingdom there is no thief, no miser, no drunkard, no man without an altar in his house, no ignorant person, no adulterer, much less an adulteress. I am going to perform a sacrifice. Sirs, and as much wealth as I give to each Ritvik priest, I shall give to you, sirs. Please to stay here. They replied, Every man ought to say for what purpose he comes. You know at present that Vaisvanara self. Tell us that. He said, Tomorrow I shall give you an answer. Therefore, on the next morning they approached him, carrying fuel in their hands, like students, and he, without first demanding any preparatory rites, said to them, 12th Kanda. Anupamanyava, whom do you meditate on as the self? He replied, Heaven only, Venerable King. He said, The self which you meditate on is the Vaisvanara self, called Sutejas, having good light. Therefore, every kind of Soma libation is seen in your house. You eat food and see your desire, a son, etc. And whoever thus meditates on that Vaisvanara self, eats food, sees his desire, and has Vedic glory arising from study and sacrifice in his house. That, however, is but the head of the self, and thus your head would have fallen in a discussion if you had not come to me. 13th Kanda. Then he said to Satyayajna Paulushi, O Prachina Yogya, whom do you meditate on as the Self? He replied, The Sun only, Venerable King. He said, The Self which you meditate on is the Vaisvanara Self, called Visvarupa, multiform. Therefore, much and manifold wealth is seen in your house. There is a car with mules, full of slaves and jewels. You eat food and see your desire, and whoever thus meditates on the Vaisvanara Self eats food and sees his desire, and has Vedic glory in his house. That, however, is but the eye of the Self, and you would have become blind if you had not come to me. 14th Kanda. Then he said to Indrayumna Bhalavya, O Vayagrapadya, whom do you meditate on as the Self? He replied, Air only, Venerable King. He said, The Self which you meditate on is the Vaisvanara Self, called Pritagavartaman, having various courses. Therefore, offerings come to you in various ways, and rows of cars follow you in various ways. You eat food and see your desire, and whoever thus meditates on that Vaisvanara Self eats food and sees his desire, and has Vedic glory in his house. That, however, is but the breath of the Self, and your breath would have left you if you had not come to me. 15th Kanda. Then he said to Janasarkaraksha, Whom do you meditate on as the Self? He replied, Ether only, Venerable King. He said, The Self which you meditate on is the Vaisvanara Self, called Bahula, full. Therefore, you are full of offspring and wealth. You eat food and see your desire, and whoever thus meditates on that Vaisvanara Self eats food and sees his desire, and has Vedic glory in his house. That, however, is but the trunk of the Self, and your trunk would have perished if you had not come to me. 16th Kanda. Then he said to Buddhila Asvantrasvi, O Vayagrahapadya, whom do you meditate on as the Self? He replied, Water only, Venerable King. He said, The Self which you meditate on is the Vaisvanara Self, called Rayi, wealth. Therefore are you wealthy and flourishing. You eat food and see your desire, and whoever thus meditates on that Vaisvanara Self eats food and sees his desire, and has Vedic glory in his house. That, however, is but the bladder of the Self, and your bladder would have burst if you had not come to me. 17th Kanda. Then he said to Adalaka Aruni, O Gautama, whom do you meditate on as the Self? He replied, The earth only, Venerable King. He said, The Self which you meditate on is the Vaisvanara Self, called Pratishta, firm rest. Therefore, you stand firm with offspring and cattle. You eat food and see your desire, and whoever thus meditates on that Vaisvanara Self eats food and sees his desire, and has Vedic glory in his house. That, however, are but the feet of the Self, and your feet would have given way if you had not come to me. 18th Kanda. Then he said to them all, You eat your food, knowing that Vaisvanara Self as if it were many. But he who worships the Vaisvanara Self as a span long, and as identical with himself, he eats food in all worlds, in all beings, in all selves. Of that Vaisvanara self, the head is Sutejas, having good light; the eye Viswarupa, multiform; the breath Pritagavartman, having various courses; the trunk Bahula, full; the bladder Rai, wealth; the feet the earth; the chest the altar; the hairs the grass on the altar; the heart the Grahapatya fire; the mind the Anvaharya fire; the mouth the Ahavanya fire. 19th Kanda. Therefore, the first food which a man may take is in the place of Homa, and he who offers that first oblation should offer it to Prana, upbreathing, saying Swaha. Then Prana, upbreathing, is satisfied. If Prana is satisfied, the eye is satisfied. If the eye is satisfied, the sun is satisfied. If the sun is satisfied, heaven is satisfied. If heaven is satisfied, whatever is under heaven and under the sun is satisfied. And through their satisfaction, he, the sacrificer or eater, himself is satisfied with offspring, cattle, health, brightness, and Vedic splendor. 20th Kanda. And he who offers the second oblation should offer it to Vyana, back breathing, saying Swaha. Then Vyana is satisfied. If Vyana is satisfied, the ear is satisfied. If the ear is satisfied, the moon is satisfied. If the moon is satisfied, the quarters are satisfied. If the quarters are satisfied, whatever is under the quarters and under the moon is satisfied. And through their satisfaction, he, the sacrificer or eater, himself is satisfied with offspring, cattle, health, brightness, and Vedic splendor. 21st Kanda. And he who offers the third oblation should offer it to Apana, down breathing, saying Swaha. Then Apana is satisfied. If Apana is satisfied, the tongue is satisfied. If the tongue is satisfied, Agni, fire, is satisfied. If Agni is satisfied, the earth is satisfied. If the earth is satisfied, whatever is under the earth and under fire is satisfied. And through their satisfaction, he, the sacrificer or eater, himself is satisfied with offspring, cattle, health, brightness, and Vedic splendor. 22nd Kanda. And he who offers the fourth oblation should offer it to Samana, on breathing, saying Swaha. Then Samana is satisfied. If Samana is satisfied, the mind is satisfied. If the mind is satisfied, Parjanya, god of rain, is satisfied. If Parjanya is satisfied, lightning is satisfied. If lightning is satisfied, whatever is under Parjanya and under lightning is satisfied. And through their satisfaction, he, the sacrificer or eater, himself is satisfied with offspring, cattle, health, brightness, and Vedic splendor. 23rd Kanda. And he who offers the fifth oblation should offer it to Udana, out breathing, saying Swaha. Then Udana is satisfied. If Udana is satisfied, Vayu, air, is satisfied. If Vayu is satisfied, Ether is satisfied. If Ether is satisfied, whatever is under Vayu and under the Ether is satisfied. and through their satisfaction he, the sacrificer or eater, himself is satisfied with offspring, cattle, health, brightness, and Vedic splendor. 24th Kanda. If without knowing this, one offers an Agnihotra, it would be as if a man were to remove the live coals and pour his libation on dead ashes. But he who offers this Agnihotra with a full knowledge of its true purport, he offers it, that is, he eats food, in all worlds, in all beings, in all selves. As the soft fibers of the Ishika reed, when thrown into the fire, are burnt, thus all his sins are burnt, whoever offers this Agnihotra with a full knowledge of its true purport. Even if he gives what is left of his food to a Chandala, it would be offered in his, the Chandala's, Vaisvanara self. And so it is said in this sloka: as hungry children here on earth sit expectantly round their mother, so do all beings sit round the Agnihotra, round the Agnihotra. End of Prapataka 5. Recording by Jyoti Taravanat.